Welcome back. This is the final video in a series of videos covering statutory to US GAAP conversions. You may recall that we're looking at a 10-year term life insurance product here. We're using 10 years because that is the number of years the product is going to be in force, and we're trying to make sure that all the calculations are consistent and working as intended. The controls are just absolutely essential whenever you do a spreadsheet like this. This particular spreadsheet has several pages, thousands of formulas, many places where a mistake can be made. And we want to do everything we can to make sure that there aren't any mistakes in the spreadsheet. This won't catch everything, but it will catch a lot of different things. So I highly recommend having controls like this. If you're an auditor and you're looking at statutory to GAAP conversions, I would look for similar types of controls when you're doing your work. Well, let's get started here. You might recall that when we were talking about doing these calculations early on, that if you look at statutory profits or tax profits or US GAAP profits and add it up all the way along any given year, the total amount of profit should not vary, and that's exactly what's happening with our spreadsheet. So we're passing this control. Next test we're doing here is called a reserve roll forward test. There's two ways to compute reserves. One way would be using a present value methodology, taking present value benefits and expenses minus present value of premiums, or you can use a roll forward methodology. You do either methodology, you just pull the numbers here, you get the exact same values. So this is working just as we would like to have it work on a statutory basis and on a US GAAP basis. Another good check here is to look at total investment income for statutory and US GAAP. For the statutory and US GAAP calculations, we are splitting up income a little bit differently, the investment income. In this particular example, we have investment income supporting reserves in two different places and then all other items. The investment income supporting reserves is going to be a little bit higher on a statutory basis than a GAAP basis because of the fact that the statutory reserves are a little bit larger. But at the end of the day, the total amount of investment income should not vary because you still have the same assets, you should have the same investment income. You know, there can be some exceptions to this particular rule when you're looking at stat and GAAP. Those differences tend to be very minor when you're looking at GAAP net income. I'm not going to go into where we might get a variation right now, but sometimes you do see some minor differences. It's a good check just to see how close those are, the statutory investment income and the US GAAP investment income. The next check here is looking at profits determined two different ways. I always like having two different models to compute something, and here's the case where we have two different models to compute profits. You have two different models and they produce the same results. That's usually a good thing. One of the models is using a source of earnings analysis to come up with the profits. Another one is just a standard methodology where you have cash flows minus the change in reserves. The profits from either one of those methodologies turns out to be exactly the same for both statutory and US GAAP on all periods. The last one is probably one of the key ones, and one of the ones where I most likely defined an error in calculations. There's not an error here, luckily, but this is a GAAP equity check. There's two ways to come up with GAAP equity. One way is to look at the starting equity. You'll add in any profits that you're making, and then you add in the shareholder dividends, and you'll come up with the ending equity. Not too hard, just a roll forward. There's another way of determining GAAP equity, and that's to take GAAP assets minus GAAP liabilities. You'll get GAAP equity. You notice that these two numbers are exactly equal like we would like them to be. It's a good sign that the calculations are working as anticipated. I really like this particular check because it's actually bringing in a lot of statutory items too. In this case, we're bringing in shareholder dividends, which is something that's calculated on a statutory income statement and balance sheet. And that item, when we put it into the GAAP calculations, tells us that there's a high probability that the calculations are working as intended. Well, there you have it. Those are the controls that are being shown up here. You can come up with additional controls. I hope you enjoyed this video.